October 25th, 1415. A muddy field in northern France would become the graveyard of a generation of French nobility. On one side, King Henry V of England, young, battle-hardened, and vastly outnumbered. On the other, the flower of French chivalry, knights draped in gold, banners waving, convinced that victory was certain. What happened next defied everything the medieval world believed about warfare, because in just a few hours, the pride of France would be cut down, not by knights, not by cavalry, but by archers, men of mud, leather, and wood, wielding nothing more than 6-foot bows and iron-tipped arrows. This is the story of how English archers humiliated the French nobility at Agincourt and changed the future of warfare forever. The Battle of Agincourt wasn't supposed to happen, at least not like this. In 1415, the 100 Years' War had dragged on for decades, a brutal contest between England and France over who truly ruled the French crown. But for young King Henry V, newly crowned and eager to prove himself, this war was his destiny. He believed the English crown had a rightful claim to France, and he intended to take it by force. So in August 1415, Henry launched an invasion. He landed in Normandy with around 12,000 men, knights, men-at-arms, and most crucially, thousands of longbowmen, many of them Welsh. They quickly besieged the port of Harfleur, hoping to secure a foothold for a campaign inland. But Harfleur refused to fall easily. The siege dragged on for 5 long weeks. Disease swept through the English camp, and when the city finally surrendered, Henry's army was a shadow of its former self, reduced to barely 6,000 men. Still, Henry refused to retreat. Instead, he made a bold decision to march his weakened army across enemy territory nearly 250 kilometers to the English-held port of Calais. It was an audacious, almost reckless move, and the French saw their chance. By mid-October, the French nobility had assembled an army 3 to 6 times larger, somewhere between 12,000 and 30,000 men. They were knights, lords, and men-at-arms, the elite of French society. Their goal? Crush the invaders and capture Henry himself. By the time the English reached the small village of Agincourt, they were exhausted, starving, and sick, hemmed in by forests and pursued by an army that dwarfed them. To the French, it seemed simple. This would be an easy victory, a day of glory, ransom, and revenge. But Henry knew something they didn't. The ground beneath their feet was about to become the great equalizer. The morning of October 25th dawned cold and wet. A steady rain had turned the open fields near Agincourt into a sea of mud. The English took up position along a narrow strip of land, flanked by thick woods on both sides. There was no room for the French to maneuver their massive army. Henry arranged his men in 3 divisions, men-at-arms in the centre, flanked on both sides by archers armed with the longbow, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 in total. They drove wooden stakes into the ground in front of them, angled toward the enemy, forming a deadly fence against charging horses. Across the field, the French army glittered. They were so confident in victory that many nobles argued over who would capture Henry first, and who would claim his royal ransom. They even delayed their attack to enjoy breakfast, sure that by evening the English king would be their prisoner. Finally, around 11 a.m., the English advanced, just a few hundred yards, far enough to bring the French within range. Then Henry gave the order. A wall of arrows darkened the sky. Tens of thousands of shafts whistled through the rain, hammering into armor, horses, and flesh. The longbowmen could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute, creating a storm that no army in Europe could withstand. The French cavalry surged forward, determined to silence them, but the mud trapped their horses, and the angled stakes turned their charge into a massacre. As they faltered, more arrows rained down, cutting down knights before they could even reach the English line. When the French finally reached the English men-at-arms, They were already exhausted, disoriented, and knee-deep in mud. The narrow field became a crushing bottleneck, the weight of thousands pressing forward, trampling the fallen. French knights were crushed under their own allies, suffocating in armor, unable to rise. The English, fighting shoulder to shoulder, hacked down anyone who got close. It wasn't a gallant duel of knights, it was slaughter. And the archers, once their arrows were spent, waded into the melee, wielding mallets, knives, and hatchets, finishing off wounded nobles on the ground. By midday, the French assault had completely collapsed. Their first line was annihilated. The second line tried to advance, but there was nowhere to go. Bodies blocked the field. Horses panicked. The English counterattack rolled forward, pushing the French back through the mud and into their own ranks. At this point, King Henry himself fought in the thick of it, his crown dented in battle, striking down enemies beside his men. One French charge managed to reach the English camp behind the lines, nearly capturing Henry's baggage train. Fearing another attack, Henry made a grim decision. He ordered the execution of hundreds of French prisoners, including many nobles, to prevent them from rearming or being rescued. It was a brutal act, one that shocked even his own men, but it underscored how desperate and chaotic the field had become. By late afternoon, the battle was effectively over. The once proud French army had been reduced to chaos. Thousands of knights, men of wealth and title, lay dead or dying, buried under heaps of armor and mud. Among the fallen were the Constable of France, 3 dukes, 5 counts, and over 100 barons. The English lost perhaps 400 men, a fraction of their enemy. When the fighting finally ceased, Henry's archers stood over the field, surrounded by corpses of men who had once ruled Europe. The longbow, a weapon of commoners, had shattered the myth of chivalry. The victory at Agincourt stunned Europe. France was left humiliated, its nobility decimated, its confidence broken. Henry V became a legend overnight, hailed as the warrior king destined to unite England and France. In the years that followed, Henry pressed his advantage, capturing vast territories and even marrying the daughter of the French king. For a brief moment, it seemed that England might truly rule both kingdoms. But Agincourt's legacy went beyond politics. It marked the death of medieval chivalry, the end of an era where armored knights ruled the battlefield. The longbow proved that discipline, terrain, and innovation could defeat even the most powerful aristocracy. From that day forward, warfare would never be the same. Power no longer belonged only to those born into it, but to those who could master the tools of war. The Battle of Agincourt wasn't just an English victory, it was a turning point in human history. It exposed the vulnerability of tradition, the arrogance of nobility, and the rise of common men in the art of war. On that rain-soaked field, the English archers didn't just win a battle, they destroyed an idea, that honor and heritage could protect you from skill and steel. And as the mud dried on the fields of Agincourt, the age of knights and the myth of invincibility died with it.